Doc. You disintegrated Einstein.
Calm down, Marty. I didn't disintegrate anything. The molecular structure of both Einstein and the car are completely intact.
There are movies that entertain you for a couple of hours and then fade into the back of your memory like a half-remembered dream. And then there are movies that burrow so deep into your soul that decades later, you still find yourself quoting lines, humming the soundtrack, and feeling that same electric rush of excitement you felt the very first time you watched them. Back to the Future is undeniably the latter. Since its release in 1985, this time-traveling masterpiece has captured the hearts and imaginations of multiple generations, becoming one of those rare cultural touchstones that feels just as fresh and thrilling today as it did 40 years ago. But here is the thing about beloved classics: the story you see on screen is almost never the whole story. Behind every iconic scene, every perfectly timed joke, every goosebump-inducing moment, there is a messy, complicated, fascinating human story playing out off-camera. And in the case of Back to the Future, those behind-the-scenes stories are every bit as dramatic, surprising, and entertaining as the film itself. Over the years, the cast has slowly opened up about what really happened during the making of this legendary trilogy, and what they have revealed will genuinely change the way you look at the movie forever. So buckle up, because we are about to take a deep dive into the secrets, struggles, surprises, and confessions that the Back to the Future cast has finally let the world in on. Some of these will make you laugh. Some will make your jaw drop. And all of them will make you love this movie even more than you already do. Let us start at the very beginning, because the origin story of the most famous car in movie history is one that even die-hard fans tend to get wrong. When people think of Back to the Future, the image of that sleek, silver DeLorean DMC-12 tearing down the road at 88 miles per hour is practically the first thing that comes to mind. It is inseparable from the film's identity. It is plastered on merchandise, replicated at fan conventions, and instantly recognizable to people who have never even seen the movie. But the DeLorean was not always the plan, and the original concept for the time machine was so different, so utterly bizarre by comparison, that it is almost impossible to imagine it working. In the earliest drafts of the screenplay, written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the time machine was not a vehicle at all. It was a stationary device, something closer to a chamber or a pod. And at one particularly wild stage of development, the concept involved using a refrigerator as the vessel for time travel. Yes, a refrigerator. The idea was that characters would physically climb inside this large household appliance and be transported through time. On paper, there was a certain retro, science fiction B-movie charm to the concept, the kind of thing that might have felt at home in a 1950s pulp fiction story. But practically speaking, it created enormous storytelling problems that the writers quickly recognized. The fundamental issue was mobility. A story about time travel only works if the time traveling feels exciting, dynamic, and full of possibility. A refrigerator sitting in a laboratory does not exactly scream adventure. You cannot chase a refrigerator down a street. You cannot have a refrigerator skidding to a stop in a thunderstorm while lightning crackles overhead and the audience holds its breath. The whole energy of the story demanded something that could move, something that could become a vehicle for both literal and metaphorical journeys. That realization led Zemeckis and Gale to rethink everything about how the time machine should look and function. When the DeLorean DMC-12 entered the picture, everything clicked into place. The car had already developed a cult reputation in real life. It was known for its striking stainless steel body, its low-slung silhouette, and its dramatic gull-wing doors that swung upward like the wings of some futuristic bird. The DeLorean looked like it had arrived from another era even when it was sitting still. It was quirky, it was unconventional, and it had a personality that made it perfect for a story about a quirky, unconventional scientist who builds impossible things in his garage. By transforming the time machine into a car, the filmmakers did something genuinely brilliant. They gave it a soul. The DeLorean was no longer just a plot device. It became a character in its own right, as memorable and beloved as Doc Brown or Marty McFly themselves. Here is something that should feel almost criminal given how the story ended. Back to the Future was rejected. Repeatedly. Enthusiastically. By people who were supposedly experts at recognizing good ideas. When Zemeckis and Gale first began pitching their script around Hollywood, they were met with a wall of polite, and sometimes not so polite, indifference. Studios did not know what to make of a story that blended science fiction with comedy and coming-of-age drama and genuine emotional stakes. It was too weird for some, too risky for others, and too difficult to market for nearly everyone. The rejections piled up. Some executives worried that audiences would find the time travel concept too confusing. Others thought the humor was too offbeat to appeal to mainstream moviegoers. There were concerns about the cost of the special effects. doubts about whether the central relationship between a teenage boy and an eccentric older scientist would resonate, and general skepticism about whether a movie that defied easy categorization could find its audience. For a project that would eventually become one of the highest-grossing films of its decade and spawn one of cinema's most beloved franchises, the level of initial disinterest from the industry is genuinely staggering. What saved the film from disappearing into the pile of great ideas that Hollywood failed to recognize was a combination of stubborn creative vision and one very important name. Steven Spielberg, already one of the most powerful and respected figures in the film industry following the massive successes of Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and E.T., saw something in the script that the skeptical executives had missed. He believed in the story, believed in Zemeckis as a director, and used his considerable influence to push the project forward. His involvement gave Universal Pictures enough confidence to greenlight the production, even if some of the studio's enthusiasm remained cautious at best. The lesson here is one that Hollywood keeps having to relearn: the gatekeepers are not always right. The people who rejected Back to the Future were not stupid or malicious. They were simply applying conventional wisdom to an unconventional idea, and conventional wisdom has a poor track record when it comes to genuine originality. Every time you watch that DeLorean accelerate toward 88 miles per hour and disappear in a flash of light, remember that dozens of people in expensive suits once looked at that same idea and said no thank you. This is the part of the Back to the Future story that most people have heard at least a version of, but the full truth is richer and more complicated than the simplified version that usually gets told. Michael J. Fox is so completely identified with the role of Marty McFly that it is nearly impossible to picture anyone else in those self-lacing sneakers. But Fox was not the first actor to play the character on camera. For several weeks of actual production, Marty McFly was played by a completely different actor, and the footage exists. Eric Stoltz was a serious, respected young actor with genuine dramatic chops when he was cast as Marty McFly. He approached the role with the kind of intense, committed method acting style that had earned him strong reviews in more dramatic projects. And that, it turned out, was precisely the problem. Marty McFly needed to be earnest and relatable and funny. He needed to feel like a normal teenage kid who just happened to find himself in the most abnormal situation imaginable. Stoltz's performance, by all accounts, was technically skilled, but it was weighted with a gravity and seriousness that kept undercutting the film's essential lightness. The comedy was not landing the way it needed to, and after weeks of filming, Zemeckis and Gale made the extraordinarily difficult decision to replace their lead actor and start over. Meanwhile, Fox had been unavailable because of his commitments to the television series Family Ties, where he played the fast-talking Alex P. Keaton. The producers of Family Ties were protective of their star and had initially refused to release him for the film. When the shooting schedule on the TV show shifted enough to create a window, Zemeckis and Gale moved immediately. Fox signed on, and what followed was one of the most grueling work schedules any actor has ever endured for a single project. By day, he filmed Family Ties. By night, often running on just a few hours of sleep, he filmed Back to the Future. He maintained this punishing pace for months, fueled by caffeine, professional commitment, and what he would later describe as the simple recognition that this role was something extraordinary. The result was pure magic. Fox brought an effortless comic timing, a natural charisma, and a genuine emotional warmth to Marty McFly that made the character feel completely alive. Where Stoltz had brought dramatic weight, Fox brought irresistible energy. The film snapped into focus around him, and audiences embraced the character so completely that it is now simply impossible to separate Fox from the role. The story of Michael J. Fox joining the cast mid-production was not experienced as pure excitement by everyone on set. For Lee Thompson, who had been cast as Lorraine Baines, the teenage version of Marty's mother, the arrival of Fox came wrapped in complicated emotions that she has only recently been fully candid about discussing publicly. Thompson had worked with Eric Stoltz during those initial weeks of filming, and the two had developed a genuine friendship and working rapport. Stoltz's method approach meant that he stayed in character, brought enormous intensity to every scene, and treated the work with a seriousness that Thompson respected. When Stoltz was let go, Thompson felt the loss personally. She had bonded with him, trusted him, and suddenly he was gone, replaced by someone who, in her view at the time, came from an entirely different and lesser world. Because Fox was primarily known as a television star, Thompson's initial attitude toward him was shaped by the rigid hierarchy that existed in Hollywood at the time. In the early 1980s, the divide between film and television was taken very seriously by people within the industry. Movie stars occupied a higher social and professional rung than TV actors, and Thompson, who saw herself firmly on the film side of that divide, struggled to immediately accept Fox as an equal. She has acknowledged in interviews that she arrived on set with a certain prejudice already in place, not hostility exactly, but a cool distance that reflected her skepticism about whether this TV star could carry a major motion picture. What changed everything was actually watching Fox work. As they filmed the scenes set in the 1950s, particularly the deeply awkward sequences where Lorraine develops a romantic interest in a boy who is, unbeknownst to her, her own future son, Thompson saw something that her preconceptions had prevented her from expecting. Fox was extraordinary. His timing was impeccable, his instincts were unerring, and he had this remarkable ability to take situations that were genuinely absurd and make them feel emotionally true. He was not just funny. He was the specific kind of funny that this specific story required. And slowly, Thompson's walls came down. By the end of production, Thompson had developed a deep admiration for Fox that she carries to this day. She has been publicly generous in acknowledging that her initial attitude said more about her own biases than about his actual talent, and that kind of honest self-reflection is genuinely rare in an industry not known for encouraging it.